So today, lads, it's I think we've gone into a time machine. We've gone into a time machine back 4 months where the WNBA Media is back doing some of the things like that was happening during the year, and I don't know what happened. All it took to start everything again was, the Indiana Fever signing Bree Turner. That was where the Matrix glitched. That was the thing that glitched the Matrix and sent us back 4 or 5 months. And obviously, no, I'm not saying that is the catalyst. That is just, though, I'm just talking about that as a point where obviously people have now lost their minds. But we've gone back again, by the way, to what about the others? Just like we've gone to Fever fan bad, or can't criticize basketball without it being considered racist. Like that, we're now at that extent again. We're now going back to that. But anyway, so if you don't remember, a few days ago, Caitlin Clark's agent did an interview talking about Caitlin Clark, basically talking about Caitlin Clark and why Caitlin Clark can never really get paid what she's worth to the WNBA. Talking about Caitlin Clark. The interview is about Caitlin Clark. And straight away, we have this clip right here from the We Need to Talk Now podcast. I don't know what exactly it is. I'm just going to play the audio. I'm not going to show the clip. But it's the person on the right saying it. As far as I'm aware, the person on the left didn't have the same viewpoint. But let's take a listen to this. And by the way, it's not like the point is necessarily wrong, but it's not right either.
Weird the way that it came through, and a lot of people I think it was like a little weird the way that it came through, and a lot of people had things to say about positioning just Caitlin Clark, which I agree with, because she's not the only player that brought in revenue. She's not the only player who's bringing in eyes. She's brought in a lot. Her impact is great, but you could say the same thing for the entire rookie class that came in last year.
I'm not joking when I say this. Caitlin Clark could do a workout and it would get more views than Unrivaled 1v1 competition. Like, you could televise a Caitlin Clark workout and it would get more views than Unrivaled. That's not saying that the Unrivaled 1v1 competition was not a success. That's not saying that these other players can bring in viewership. Because let's be real, when we're talking about Caitlin Clark herself, or when we're talking about Unrivaled's most viewed thing was Aaliyah Edwards versus Nafisa Collier in a 1v1 competition. The 1v1 competition that didn't have Breanna, didn't have Angel Reese, was what ended up pulling in the most views. But you better believe if Caitlin Clark subbed in as an injury replacement for one game like Benai Delaney did, it would be the single most viewed game in Unrivaled. At least 500,000 people would watch it. Like, and that's just a fact. Like, yes, it is a factually correct statement to say Caitlin Clark is not the only person that brought in viewers. Just like it is a factually correct statement to say that there were at least a person that watched the Heatles for Mario Chalmers. But nobody said Mario Chalmers was why they were so hyped. There were probably a couple of Bill Cartwright fans out there. No one said, what about Bill Cartwright when Jordan was getting all the praise? And obviously that's just going to an extreme example. But obviously the likes of Angel Reese, Cameron Brink brought in fans. But there's a reason why Caitlin Clark games boomed. And then the people that became rivals with Caitlin Clark in the W, and I don't even mean rivals in a negative way, rivals in like oh wow, this player's good. Like, for example, a Arike Gumbawale from the All-Star break. People forget how many people watched the Dallas Wings versus Caitlin Clark the first game after they played each other after the Olympic break. Not directly first, but like they played 3 or 4 games after the Olympic break because people wanted to watch Arike and watch Caitlin Clark. Like, when we're talking about the names that are box office and people want to watch, in the W, like, it's Caitlin Clark and then the rest. Like, I don't know who the second biggest draw in the WNBA is. I don't know if it's Aaliyah Boston. I don't know if it's AJ Wilson. I don't know if it's Arike. I don't know if it's going to be Paige. I don't know if it's Angel Reese. There's no player that draws in fans like Caitlin Clark. Like, Caitlin Clark, her jersey retirement ceremony was like the second most viewed game in all of college. She wasn't even playing. And can we stop this narrative? And the worst part about this, This was an interview by Caitlin Clark's agent. This was, this was an interview by Caitlin Clark's agent about Caitlin Clark. You are complaining that Caitlin Clark's agent did not bring up the other players in an interview about Caitlin Clark. And yes, obviously there are WNBA players that are underpaid. There are also WNBA players that are overpaid. Genuinely. I mean that. There are WNBA players that are overpaid. And I know people are going to be like, oh, you can't, like, you shouldn't say that, if that's not the case, like, WNBA players, like, should all be paid more. No, they shouldn't. No, they shouldn't. Just like the NBA players. There are a lot of overpaid NBA players, but there are a lot of underpaid NBA players. Like LeBron in his prime making $20 million a year when he was worth 100. There are players, Wemby's making 10 million a year, probably worth 50. There are players that are being historically underpaid. But in terms of percentage of their salary versus what they're paid, what they should be paid, there has never been a bigger discrepancy than what Caitlin Clark is right now. If we're talking an every single player being paid what they're worth if there's no salary cap, Caitlin Clark is probably worth about, I would say Caitlin is worth about 10 to 15 million a year. And because of the TV rights deal, people are like, oh, she's worth more than max NBA players. Yes, she probably is, just in terms of putting butts in seats and stuff, but the TV rights deal is the TV rights deal. TV rights deal allows NBA players to be overpaid. For example, like, no way in hell is a Brandon Ingram or a Jimmy Butler worth 60 million to anybody. But obviously with the rights deal and everything, they can afford that. If we're just based on like what they bring into the franchise, based on the next player, Caitlin Clark's probably worth about 10 to 15 million a year. Angel Reese is probably worth, I'll give Angel Reese 2 million a year. I think she's worth about 2 million a year. I think Aja Wilson is probably worth about $1 million. I put Breanna Steward in that million. Breanna probably around 2 million as well. If we're actually paying people what they're worth to the league, about 2 mil. Like that's kind of it. I think you can make the argument that Caitlin Clark is so underpaid that in proportion to what she brings to the league, paying Caitlin Clark, like the WNBA's current salary is like 1.5 million per team. Let's say there's 13 teams. So that's 15 plus 4.5 is 22.5 million. I think her, like, if she was paid what every single player in the WNBA is paid right now under the salary cap, that's maybe what she's worth for the league. Like, we can be honest with that. And it's not to say that she's the only player that's underpaid, because there's a lot of players that are underpaid. But then you also have to take into account, like, 180k for a Katie Lou Samuelson to sit on the end of the bench for 3 months is an overpay, based on the way the state the league is. I'm trying to think of who else. There's like a lot of, Erica Wheeler was an overpay last year. Even if there was no salary cap, she would have been an overpay. But that doesn't mean that, like, that's the way it is in sports. Everyone's going to be paid, everyone's going to be underpaid, but there's never been a bigger underpay in the history of sports based on percentage-wise than Caitlin Clark. Caitlin Clark's getting paid 79k, and I think you could say 22 million is probably gassing it what she should be paid, but a minimum 10, probably around 15. 20 is kind of on the upper end. But let's just say for argument's sake, she is 20 million is what she's worth. Obviously, you could argue less. So let's go at the calculator here. So she's making 79. I don't know what she meant. Let's say 75,000 divided by 20 million is 0.00375. So if you multiply that by 100, she's making 0.375% of her realistic worth. Even like a Victor Wembanyama, who you're saying is probably making, say, 40 million under what he's worth, is still making roughly 20% of what he's worth. She's making him as 0.35 on the high end. If you think she should be making 10 million a year, bump that up to 0.75. But she's still making less. She's still making less than 1% of what she realistically should be worth for that team. Whereas if you look, again, if you want to calculate Angels, so let's just say Angels worth 2 million. And honestly, that's being a little bit generous. So you just multiply that by 10. So it's 3.75%, which is still a drastic underpay, but like significantly lower than Caitlin Clark. But either way, it doesn't matter. None of this math, none of this calculator stuff matters. All that matters is the fact that this was an interview by Caitlin Clark's agent talking about Caitlin Clark. This was an interview by Clark's agent talking about Caitlin Clark. Why do we have to add the "they're watching because of Me Too" into this? Into this of all things. If the question is Caitlin Clark solely responsible for the growth in the WNBA? The answer is no. Is she mostly responsible? Yes. Is she solely responsible? No. But is she 85%, and that's being conservative? Is she 85% of the reason why the sport has boomed? Yeah. I'll give her 85%, and that's being conservative. I think you could probably go between 85 and 95%. But I'll be as conservative as possible and say she's about 85% of the reason why the sport has boomed. But I'll be willing to, if you want to say 95%, I'm not going to argue that. So yeah, there is that other small percentage of the rest of them. But we can be honest here. We don't have to talk factually, because she's not the sole reason. She's not 100% of the reason. But she's damn near close to it. But anyway, yeah, I can't believe we're still doing this crap. I'll see you guys.